Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. In the heart of a world governed by primal forces, the balance between fire, water, wind, and earth kept peace. It had been this way for centuries. The elements lived in relative harmony, each ruled by powerful elemental masters who ensured that their powers never tipped too far in one direction. The people of this world had long understood that when one element grew too powerful, devastation followed. Lyra, young wind elemental, stood on the ridge overlooking the ashen lands. A dark plume of smoke curled into the sky, a reminder that the balance was no longer holding. Fires raged far off in the distance, consuming villages and turning once fertile lands into blackened wastelands. She had felt it in the air for weeks, the growing heat, the smell of burning embers carried on the wind. Fire was expanding its reach. Her mentor, an elder named Solon, had warned her that this day would come. But Lyra had always believed that the balance was something unshakable, an immutable law of nature. Now, she could feel the wind shifting under her control, the very air uneasy as if warning her of a greater danger. She tightened her grip on her staff, a slender instrument crafted from the rarest of wind oak trees, and let the breeze lift her just slightly above the ground. "We can't wait any longer," she whispered to herself. "Ignis is pushing too far." Turning her back on the burning horizon, Lyra descended from the ridge and made her way to the elemental conclave, where the masters gathered in times of crisis. It was time to confront them. They had to act before fire consumed the world. As she arrived at the conclave, the atmosphere was tense. The air crackled with energy from every element. The master of water, Nereus, stood to one side, his eyes cold as he gazed out the window, seemingly lost in thought. Earth's representative, Galen, stood like a mountain, silent, unmoving, but ever-present. Lyra found her place next to Solon, who gave her a small nod of encouragement. Ignis, the master of fire, was conspicuously absent. "The balance is tipping," Lyra said, breaking the silence that had settled over the room like a heavy fog. "Fire is expanding beyond its borders. Villages are burning. We must act." Nereus barely moved, his voice as cold as the waters he commanded. "And what do you propose we do, Lyra? Send our people to war with fire? We've fought Ignis before, and it brought nothing but destruction to all of us." "That was different," Lyra argued. "This time, Ignis isn't just defending his territory, he's attacking. He's trying to dominate the world, and if we don't unite now, there won't be a world left to fight for." Galen finally stirred, his deep voice rumbling like a quake. "The elements must remain in balance. If Ignis is allowed to grow unchecked, he will disrupt the very foundation of our world. But rushing into conflict could destroy the harmony we've fought to maintain." Lyra's frustration bubbled to the surface. "We don't have time for hesitation. Fire won't wait for us to make a decision. We need to act now, or it will be too late." Solon placed a calming hand on her shoulder. "Patience, Lyra. Convincing them will take time. Not everyone shares your sense of urgency." But Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that every moment they delayed, the fire spread further. She needed to convince them, and she needed to do it soon. As the days passed, the conclave remained locked in debate. Each element had its own history with fire, old grievances that made cooperation difficult. Water and fire had clashed the most over the centuries, their opposing natures making peace between them tenuous at best. Earth preferred to remain neutral, content to stay grounded while the other elements fought their battles. Wind had always been the most unpredictable, free and untamed, never choosing sides, but this was different. Ignis wasn't simply lashing out, he was building something, consolidating power. And if he succeeded, the balance that held their world together would be shattered. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Nereus approached Lyra as she stood by the river that flowed through the heart of the Wind Kingdom. His expression was stern, but there was something in his eyes that Lyra hadn't seen before: resolve. "I will join you," Nereus said, his voice calm but steady. "Ignis must be stopped. But know this, Lyra, the waters do not forgive easily. If this alliance fails, it will not be forgotten." Lyra let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you, Nereus. We need all the help we can get." With Nereus by her side, Lyra felt a flicker of hope. But the next challenge lay ahead: convincing Galen, the master of Earth, to join their cause. The Earthen Vale was a vast, sprawling landscape of towering cliffs and deep caverns, a place where time seemed to move more slowly, where patience was a virtue. It was fitting that Galen, the oldest and most stoic of the elemental masters, ruled here. Lyra and Nereus arrived at Galen's stronghold after several days of travel. The journey had been arduous, but Lyra was determined. They needed Galen's strength, his resilience, if they were to have any chance of defeating Ignis. Galen greeted them with a nod, his massive frame as immovable as the mountains around him. "You've come to ask for my help," he said, his voice low and deliberate. Lyra stepped forward. "Yes. Fire is growing stronger every day. If we don't stop Ignis now, there won't be anything left to protect." Galen's gaze shifted to Nereus, then back to Lyra. "Earth is patient. We have seen many conflicts between the elements, and we have survived them all. Why should this time be any different?" "Because Ignis isn't just fighting for territory," Nereus interjected. "He's trying to take control of everything. If he succeeds, the balance will be destroyed, and your precious Earth will burn along with the rest of us." Galen was silent for a long moment, his eyes narrowing as he considered their words. Finally, he spoke. "Very well. But know this: I will not fight for revenge or power. I fight to preserve the balance, nothing more." Lyra nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. With Galen on their side, they had a real chance. But even with the alliance of water, earth, and wind, Lyra knew that defeating Ignis would not be easy. The Fire Kingdom was a desolate, unforgiving place, known as the Inferno Wastes. It was a land of molten rivers and burning skies, a place where fire reigned supreme. Ignis had built his fortress here, surrounded by his army of fire elementals, creatures born from the flames themselves. As they approached the outskirts of the Fire Kingdom, Lyra could feel the heat pressing against her, an oppressive force that made it difficult to breathe. The air was thick with smoke, and the ground beneath their feet was scorched and cracked. "We'll never get through those defenses," Nereus said, his voice grim. "Ignis has fortified his position well." Lyra looked out at the landscape before them, her mind racing. They needed a plan, something that would give them an edge. "There's a way," she said, her voice quiet but determined. "Ignis is drawing his power from something, a source that's amplifying his strength. If we can find it and destroy it, we can weaken him enough to stand a chance." Galen frowned. "And how do you propose we find this source?" Lyra hesitated. She didn't have all the answers, but she had to trust her instincts. "I don't know yet. But I can feel it. There's something here, something unnatural. We have to find it, or we'll never stop him." Together, the three of them made their way deeper into the Inferno Wastes, their eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of the source of Ignis' power. The heat grew more intense with every step, and the ground seemed to pulse with energy, as if the very land was alive with fire. It wasn't long before they encountered the first of Ignis' forces, fire elementals, their bodies made entirely of flame, their eyes burning with malice. The battle that followed was fierce, each element struggling to assert its dominance over the other. The fire elementals surged toward them, each one a twisting, burning mass of raw energy. Their crackling heat pressed in from all sides, making it difficult to breathe. Lyra raised her staff, and with a sweep of her hand, the wind howled to life. The gusts swirled around the advancing fire elementals, stirring the ash and embers into a blinding storm. Nereus, standing by her side, thrust his hands forward, summoning a torrent of water from the flask strapped to his back. The water crashed into the fire elementals, dousing their flames in thick clouds of steam. Each hiss of evaporating water was a small victory, but the elementals were relentless, reforming themselves in the blink of an eye. Galen stood his ground, his broad frame unmoving. With a heavy stomp, he sent shockwaves rippling through the ground, opening chasms that swallowed the fire elementals whole. The earth groaned beneath his power, responding to his command as if it had always been a part of him, but for every fire elemental they defeated, 2 more took its place. "We can't keep this up," Nereus shouted over the roar of the flames. "We need to find the source." Lyra nodded, her eyes scanning the landscape. She could feel it now, that unnatural pull, like a knot in the fabric of the world. The source of Ignis' power was close, hidden somewhere in the heart of the inferno. She closed her eyes, reaching out with her senses, letting the wind guide her. "There," she shouted, pointing toward a jagged mountain in the distance, its peak glowing red-hot from the molten rivers flowing down its slopes. "It's there, at the top." The 3 of them fought their way through the horde of fire elementals, their combined powers barely keeping the enemy at bay. Lyra led the charge, her wind slicing through the flames like a blade, while Nereus and Galen kept the elementals from overwhelming them. The heat was suffocating, each breath burning in her lungs, but Lyra pressed on, her determination burning brighter than the flames around them. At the base of the mountain, they were met with a sight that made Lyra's heart sink. Ignis himself, standing at the summit, his body wreathed in flame, his eyes glowing with power. He was waiting for them. "So, you've come," Ignis called down to them, his voice carrying over the roar of the inferno. "I knew you would." It was only a matter of time before the other elements sought to challenge me. Lyra gritted her teeth. "This isn't about a challenge, Ignis. It's about balance. You're destroying everything." Ignis laughed, a deep, rumbling sound that sent shivers down her spine. "Balance? There is no balance, child. Fire is the only true power in this world. The others are weak, meant to be consumed, to fuel the flames of creation." Nereus stepped forward, his voice as cold as the ocean depths. "You're a fool, Ignis. Fire cannot survive without the other elements. Without water, wind, and earth, your flames will burn themselves out." "Perhaps," Ignis said, his eyes narrowing. "But by the time that happens, there will be nothing left to save." Before Lyra could respond, Ignis raised his hand, and the ground beneath them erupted in flames. A massive wall of fire shot up, separating them from the mountain. The heat was unbearable, forcing them back. "We have to get through that," Lyra said, shielding her face from the flames. "I can douse it," Nereus said, already preparing to summon more water. "No," Lyra said, stopping him. "That's exactly what Ignis wants. He'll use up all your strength before we even reach him." Galen nodded. "She's right. We need another way." Lyra thought quickly, her mind racing. The fire was too strong to confront head-on, but they didn't need to destroy it, they just needed to go around it. She closed her eyes, letting the wind flow through her, and then she felt it, a gap in the flames, a path hidden from sight. "There's a way through," she said, opening her eyes. "Follow me." With a deep breath, Lyra stepped into the inferno, the wind swirling around her like a protective shield. The flames licked at her skin, but the wind kept them at bay, carving a narrow path through the wall of fire. Nereus and Galen followed close behind, their elemental powers combining with hers to hold the flames back. They reached the other side, and the sight that greeted them was worse than Lyra had imagined. The summit of the mountain was a sea of molten lava, bubbling and churning with unimaginable heat. At the center of it all was the source of Ignis' power, a massive, glowing crystal, pulsing with energy. "It's amplifying his power," Nereus said, his eyes wide. "That's how he's been able to grow so strong." Galen frowned. "We have to destroy it." But as they took a step forward, Ignis appeared before them, his body blazing with fury. "You will not touch the source," he snarled, flames erupting from his hands. "I am fire incarnate. I will burn this world to ash, and from the ashes, a new world will rise, one where fire reigns supreme." The battle that followed was unlike anything Lyra had ever experienced. Ignis was more powerful than they had anticipated, his flames relentless, his attacks devastating. Nereus summoned massive waves of water to douse the flames, while Galen sent shockwaves through the earth, creating fissures in the ground that swallowed the lava. But Ignis was always one step ahead, his control over fire absolute. Lyra fought with everything she had, the wind howling around her as she darted through the battlefield, striking at Ignis whenever she could find an opening. But it wasn't enough. Ignis was too strong, too fast, and then, in a moment of clarity, Lyra realized the truth: they couldn't defeat Ignis by fighting fire with fire. They had to work together, to combine their powers in a way that Ignis couldn't anticipate. "Nereus! Galen!" she shouted over the roar of the flames. "We have to combine our elements. It's the only way." The two masters hesitated for a moment, but then they nodded, understanding what Lyra was trying to do. Together, they channeled their powers, each element feeding into the other. Water flowed into the cracks created by Galen's earth-shaking strikes, cooling the molten lava and hardening it into solid ground. The wind whipped around them, fanning the flames in a controlled way, turning Ignis' own fire against him. Ignis roared in frustration, but it was too late. The combined power of the elements was too much for him to withstand. Lyra surged forward, using the wind to propel herself toward the glowing crystal. She raised her staff and brought it down with all her strength, shattering the crystal into 1,000 pieces. The effect was immediate. The flames around them flickered and died, and the heat that had been so oppressive moments before dissipated into the air. Ignis, his power drained, collapsed to his knees, the fire in his eyes extinguished. "It's over," Lyra said, her voice barely more than a whisper. Ignis looked up at her, his expression one of shock and disbelief. "How?" he asked, his voice weak. "How did you defeat me?" Lyra knelt beside him, her eyes filled with sorrow. "You forgot the most important lesson, Ignis. No element can exist on its own. Fire is powerful, yes, but without the other elements, it burns itself out. The balance must be maintained." Ignis said nothing, his body slowly crumbling to ash. The fire that had once threatened to consume the world was gone, reduced to nothing more than a memory. With the battle won, Lyra, Nereus, and Galen stood at the summit, looking out over the landscape below. The inferno that had once raged across the land was gone, replaced by a calm, quiet peace, but the cost had been great. Nereus, exhausted from the battle, sat down heavily, his face pale. "We've done it," he said, his voice weak. "But at what cost?" Lyra shook her head, her heart heavy. "The balance will be restored, but it will take time. The damage that's been done, it won't be easy to repair." Galen placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression solemn. "We've won the battle, Lyra. That's all we can do for now." As they made their way back down the mountain, Lyra couldn't help but think about the future. The balance had been restored, but it was fragile. It always would be. The elements would always be in conflict, always struggling to assert themselves. But now, she understood something that Ignis had never been able to grasp. True power didn't come from domination. It came from harmony, from understanding that every element, every force, had its place in the world, and as long as there were those who understood that, the balance would hold.